let's chat about Untold, Mouse in the Palace. So, what's interesting about this is that this is basically a Netflix documentary series. So, each episode will be breaking down, I would say, a controversial moment or figure or event that's happened in sports. So this Mouse in the Palace is part of a documentary series. So it's kind of like 30 for 30, but just more controversial.
It's kind of
Um,
Netflix's competition with 30 for 30 from ESPN, it seems like.
for sure. And a lot of these documentaries have popped up over the recent years. And I think I would like to give credit for the more of the darker genre. Because I think 30 for 30 it's more uplifting stories, I would say. They delve into darker stuff, but a lot of it's more from the positive side of sports.
Mhm.
In terms of this darker genre, I would say like Vice with the darker side of the ring, the wrestling series. So they're on the third season of that. So now they're doing the darker side of football, the darker side of music. So that they're delving into different genres of more like darker stories. So I think Untold is kind of in that same space. So first episode, Mouse in the Palace, directed by Floyd Russ. I know Jermaine O'Neal had a lot to do about executive producing this documentary as well. He's been the front man, basically promoting this everywhere. Steven Jackson, Meta World Peace are also in this as well, and basically covers probably the darkest moment, arguably in sports history, in terms of a single event that happened. Um, and involving fans and athletes, in a confrontation. And this happened on November 14th, 2004. I have a particular story about this. I was hanging out with some friends on a Friday night. It was my birthday, so they're, celebrating my birthday. Come home and I'm watching Sports Center, and all hell's breaking loose in Detroit. So my parents were asleep. My brother was asleep. I'm just like captivated, just realizing what the hell's going on in this arena. Just I don't think we need to break down. I think the documentary description explained things for itself. Basically, it runs through the timeline of the course of events that led up to this incident that happened. So the documentary is split in basically two parts, actually three parts actually. So first part breaks down Jermaine O'Neal, Steven Jackson, Reggie Miller in terms of their careers. And I think this was great. There's some criticism about this, but I think it was very unfair. I think this was the right way to go. Introducing these people as characters, why it meant so much. This season meant much to them, and what the stakes were heading into this game with Detroit. So I thought that was great. Part two broke down the incident, and part three broke down basically the consequences from that. So just some general thoughts from me, and I'll pass it over to you, Matt. I think for a person that viewed this for the first time, I watched it with my girlfriend. I think this was a really good documentary. Really set the characters, set the consequences of what happened, and the conclusion. I have my nitpicks. As I found out later on, I think AM Hoops, Casey Kieran actually broke down this great on his YouTube channel. And I learned this from him, and I forgot about this with Meta World Peace in regards to the fan that threw the cup at him. I believe he made amends with not only the guy that he punched by mistake, but also the guy who started it all. And I wasn't in the documentary, so I think that was a miss. I think another miss, which was surprising to me, he was involved in producing it with Jermaine O'Neal. Like his success as a person, Casey Kieran has a great video as Jermaine O'Neal, being a huge success. I mean, he is a multimillionaire with all the businesses he owns. I mean, he's a great success. And I think from the documentary, you would think of him as kind of a failure, but you take a look at his post-playing career, he's a massive success. So I think I would have liked to see kind of him have a happy ending to it as well. Because you saw what, Steven Jackson and Meta World Peace, they won their championships. But, Jermaine O'Neal's doing just fine. So I would like to see that. I think another thing to criticize is a lack of the Detroit Pistons perspective. We saw Ben Wallace. So where's Chauncey Billups? Where's Rip Hamilton? Where's Larry Brown? Just more of a Detroit perspective as to what happened in this brawl would have been nice. Because I think it was basically just an Indiana deal. I understand that, but at the same time, it involved two teams. This incident was in Detroit. So, I mean, this is not an Indiana Pacers documentary. It kind of felt that way. And the promotion on this documentary made it seem like you're going to see it from different perspectives. So that was my main kind of gripes with it. But overall, I enjoyed it. What did you think, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, at first I'll say I really enjoyed it. It was compelling. I would echo many of the things that you said. Um, I think the documentary did a great job. You mentioned the three parts that it kind of goes in. And one of the things that was kind of cool about it in the transitions, there was this really suspenseful, kind of ominous, eerie soundtrack in the background. It really did a good job of building suspense up to the moment that you have this terrible brawl that breaks out basically in the whole arena. So kudos to them for building that narrative and kind of showing a lot of background to it. I also was surprised by how much I had forgotten about this era in basketball. I mean, this was a time where I was really watching a lot of basketball. And I had forgotten that this is basically the season that ended Reggie Miller's career. I have just for whatever reason, I think part of that was that, he was injured and in a suit on that night that the fight broke out. It just didn't register to me that that was Reggie Miller's last moment in the NBA. I thought maybe it was the season before that or so, but obviously knew right away that I was wrong when he was in the documentary and talking about these things with this team. I will say I agree with you. I would have liked to see more Pistons staff and Pistons players, but I was pretty surprised when I saw that there were Pistons fans in the documentary and that they were both invited to participate and that they agreed to participate.
That guy was such a scumbag in there. The guy that got punched by Jermaine O'Neal. He's still a piece of garbage now.
Yeah, I don't really think any of those fans came off looking good. No. And also, I mean, the guy who incited everything, John Green, didn't. There was nothing redemptive for those fans. I kind of felt like, it's hard to ignore that Jermaine O'Neal produced this. And it did feel kind of like a what if documentary, like how great of a center would Jermaine O'Neal had been had this not all fallen apart. They kept alluding to the Pacers being the clear favorites to win the title this season. And while it's true that they were at the top of the East at the time of this game, I'm not sure that I buy that. As we know, a lot of your success depends on matchups in the playoffs. And there's just so much that could happen, that could go wrong, even if this never takes place, that I don't know that you can really say that. Certainly they were a favorite, though. They were a factor that can't be denied. But it's also, you get this sense, and obviously it's because they're interviewing these players and things, but you get the sense that, these punishments were way too harsh for these players. And that's something that I don't know that I agree with. Like I don't think I think they had an interesting perspective, talking about like the media referring to these guys as thugs and things like that. Obviously, there are things there that I don't agree with from the media's perspective on it.
Sure.
But in terms of the suspensions being handed out, I really found myself like not having a huge problem with those suspensions, but maybe I'm maybe that's a hot take in 2021. I don't know. But when you have players going in the stands and like this idea of you got to protect the brand, I do think at the time in that moment, it's an unprecedented punishment for sure. But that's also because, like you said in the beginning, this was an unprecedented event that happened, and you want to assure the security and safety, not only of the fans, but of course of the players too, because that could have also ended much worsely for these players as well. Being that there are so many more fans than players that are there, and mobs are dangerous things. So anyway, I'm going kind of off in the weeds here, but I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with the conclusion that this documentary came to, I guess would be my point. What were your thoughts on kind of their perspective on the punishments and kind of reflecting on the after effect of this horrible event?
I thought the punishments were appropriate. It's one of those things where you can't just lay your hands on fans. I mean,
Yeah,
basically, what happened was is that again, this is my kind of wrestling fandom coming out because I'm used to, I don't know if you remember like back in the 90s in the WCW where fans pelted trash in the ring like hardcore. I mean, Scott Hall got hit with a full cup of soda.
I
He
remember
just
that.
kept
Yeah,
it going. So it's one of those things where the wrestlers never invaded the fan space, but when a fan invaded the wrestler space, that's their domain. You're threatening their um, livelihood. So, like let's say in this alternate world where that Pistons fan he just comes out on the court and he has his hands clearly up to fight. I think Jermaine O'Neal should not be suspended. He's defending himself, and that's in that scenario. I mean, I think that's somewhat or even Ron Artest. I think Ron Artest punched him.
that's right.
So I think definitely Ron Artest should not, in that one encounter, I don't think there should be a punishment. He's defending himself. That fan, he said he got pushed onto the court, which I found hilarious. I laughed out loud. I was like, what? Dude went on there to fight Ron Artest, and Ron Artest punched him. He's defending himself. So I think in that aspect, I wouldn't have. Punishing the players would be ridiculous. The problem is that Ron Artest escalated the situation.
Well, and he had been in the stands before that.
Yeah.
Punching fans along with Steven Jackson.
So
before that other fan even came down.
So what I found interesting too is I put the blame on the refs because what they broke down the confrontation between Artest and Ben Wallace, and ultimately you just eject both guys. You eject both guys. This never happens. So I don't understand why the NBA should have been more culpable in the refs de-escalating that situation. They got off scot-free. And I think we never really saw the NBA, I guess, be more aggressive with fan conduct. They blamed the players. And I think that was wrong. I think the players deserve their suspensions, but there was no consequences for the refs, and there was no consequences for fan conduct. That's a huge problem. So I see how it can be portrayed, and I understand the feelings of people that this is racially motivated. And also too, from a perspective of the dress code being implemented right after that too. So I understand those feelings because you just attacked it from a player perspective. You didn't really address, a code of conduct hardcore, like you came down on the players. That, to my knowledge, that wasn't apparent from a fan perspective, and certainly wasn't apparent from a referee perspective till way later. Because now, look at the NBA now. I mean, you breathe on the guy, you you yell at him in a high pitched voice, they're getting ejected, both guys. So it took a long time to happen. And I think in that instance, I think they failed at that. To your second point, Matt, in terms of kind of the portrayal of these players in terms of their stories, I do agree that was a flaw in the film. I believe with Jermaine O'Neal is one of those things where they highlighted Ron Artest and Steven Jackson winning the title. I believe it's kind of like Jermaine O'Neal's failure. Like, you had plenty of time, dude, as a player. I mean, it's one of those things where I looked at IMDb and Jermaine O'Neal wasn't listed as an executive producer, but it seems sure like it did because he was propped up as this player that never was, and that he got robbed of this opportunity, in this one moment, and his career was ruined. But the documentary just highlighted, Ron Artest and Steven Jackson being able to win titles and have success. And then the documentary just kind of ends. It's a question mark. It's like, what happened to this guy? Like, it made him look bad. It kind of made him look like a bum, which he's not.
And it made him look like he never played again.
Yeah, which not only that, it made him look like he's just, he's homeless on the street because you know what I mean? Like, there's no he was able to overcome and become this huge success that, Casey Kiernan highlighted. So I thought that was just a major flaw, even though, Jermaine O'Neal has been pushed in his documentary. It kind of made himself look foolish. So that was just bizarre just to kind of see the aftermath of that.
I think that's what tends to happen in documentaries nowadays too.
Yeah.
I think about what was that Netflix murder one that was all
Oh,
making a
yeah.
murderer,
There you go.
where
Yeah.
you have this documentary that conveniently leaves out a lot of really important facts of the case. It's kind of the thing here. Like if you end it by saying, "Oh, Jermaine O'Neal was this many time All Star and played in the NBA," 7 seasons after this happened, or whatever that number was, it makes it a little less interesting for the casual viewer.
I disagree. I think it makes it more interesting. It makes it feel like this guy. I mean, your storytelling, right? Like the incident, the shocking footage is the brawl, right?
Mhm,
And you saw
mhm.
the DA, you saw how that he was one of the great characters in the documentary. I loved hearing from him going into detail about the charges that he placed on the people involved, the videotape that they went into, how he knew the guy that actually started it. Like he was really compelling. So I think hearing if he got like a more of a happier ending for Jermaine O'Neal, I think it would have been just as compelling. And I think it was just kind of like a question mark. I don't. It just made it seem inconclusive instead of just at least. I mean, if you're going to go kind of the sad route, I think just go all the way. Just, just kind of, I don't know, lean into that a little bit more. And instead, it was just kind of like just a question mark. And I think with Reggie Miller, I think that's where at least with him, that was like they really leaned into, that was his last chance. And how the players didn't really take advantage of it. I mean, Reggie had to constantly talk to Ron Artest and Steven Jackson in terms of just getting their heads together, on that team. And him retiring is just it's a black mark. And I think that's where they leaned on it more. But with Jermaine O'Neal, it just seemed very just I don't know, disjointed somewhat.
Well, and of all the guys interviewed, it seemed like Jermaine O'Neal had the biggest hand in this documentary.
Sure, I did.
so,
Yeah,
I'm sure if he didn't like the way that it looked, he would have said so, and funded the film. So, I mean,
sure.
had power to tell his story the way he wanted, and I guess that's the way he wanted it told.
Yeah.
But overall, I think if I'm going to grade this documentary, I don't think it's perfect, but I do think it's very compelling. I do think it gives you a lot of new footage on that terrible incident that happened. It raises or kind of re-raises a constant conversation, but the relationship between players and fans, I think it raises a lot of good questions about that. And also is interesting the way it explores how this was responded to. So, I mean, call me, maybe the Paula Abdul of grading our documentaries here, but I would give it an A. I think it was very solid. Didn't really leave me frustrated or angry or anything like that. I felt really happy that I had watched it.
Yeah, I feel you. I mean, we're not too different. I'd give it like a B plus. I just think the Jermaine O'Neal stuff is kind of like the biggest blemish on it because he was just so involved and it leaned so much into him that we didn't really see. You would think you would prop yourself up in your own documentary, but you didn't. So it just, I don't know, it's just a weird kind of ending. But overall, I really liked it. I think it's a good historical lesson in terms of that period of the NBA. I think they really did a really good job of addressing kind of the racial issues and then also addressing the investigation and then just addressing just that team overall. So overall, I thought it was produced pretty well. So I was pretty impressed.
Right on, right on. Well, that's high praise. So about, I think on par with The Last Dance for us in terms of grades.
For sure. Yeah.
So
different reasons. Yeah, sure.
Definitely we'll look forward to more from their series, and if they have more basketball related topics or just something super compelling, we'll bring it back, follow up on it. Did you have any other topics you wanted to bring up regarding this documentary? I got one more question for you.
Yeah, go ahead with the question. I don't, so go ahead, man.
So here's my question.
Yeah.
And I feel this. I think he's likable, but let me ask you your thoughts on this, just because I find it interesting.
Okay.
Why is Ron Artest, Meta World Peace, so likable?
I think because he's authentic.
Mm.
People like people that are real.
Hmm.
I mean, take a look at the Marvel movies. Take a look at Black Panther. Take a look at Thanos. Did you see when Endgame came out, how many tweets there was about, hey, Thanos has a good point. Yeah. Even though this guy wants to destroy half of the universe, he's kind of right. Killmonger and Black Panther, he's, I don't like what he did, but he's got a good point. People like people that are genuine. I mean, look at this fight that's happening right now with Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley. Like, it's one of those things where there's something that's compelling that is bringing you in. I think with Ron Artest, he's unabashedly himself. He's not caring about what people think about him. He's just himself. He's not putting on any kind of a performance or act, even though that gets get over. But I think with Ron Artest in particular, you can see when you're talking to him, he's genuine. Look at when they won the title, when he won the title with the Lakers. He never took his jersey off. I mean, he spent 24 hours in the jersey he won the championship in. I mean, that makes him endearing. So I think that's what made him so like forgiving too, is that he put his feelings out there regarding what happened, his regrets, how he made amends, and how he, moved on to become, a champion. And I mean, that makes it very endearing. I don't know how it works in other countries, but at least I feel like in the United States, it's one of those things where just as much as people want to destroy you, they can also respect a redemptive story too, depending on the situation. So,
yeah, I think you nailed it, man. I 100% agree.